Forget New Year, New You. This season is about slowing down, locking the doors, and cozying up at home with the one you really want to do nothing with. Your dog. After the holiday chaos, those quiet nights with a blanket, a podcast, and your pup feel like the reset you actually need. Ollie helps make those moments easier with fresh protein-packed meals made from real human-grade ingredients, so your dog can enjoy some quality comfort food too. Choose from 5 recipes and get a personalized plan for your dog's needs. Meals arrive perfectly proportioned with a scoop and storage container, so serving is fast and mess-free. And with Ollie's in-app on-demand health screenings, supporting your dog is easy, ensuring more cuddles for many years to come. Visit ollie.com/truecrime and use code TRUECRIME for 60% off your first box.
Alexis Martin was a teenager charged with murder. She hadn't pulled the trigger, but she had been in the house when a robbery turned into a murder, and now a man was dead. At just 15 years old, Alexis was caught in the criminal justice system. Prosecutors said she helped plot the 2013 robbery with 3 adults. But Alexis was also a victim herself. 36-year-old Angelo Kearney, the man killed in the shooting, had been sex trafficking her. Alexis's story was chronicled in a recent Washington Post story with the headline, "The State of Ohio versus a Sex-Trafficked Teenager." Joining us today in this episode is Washington Post reporter Jessica Contrera, who wrote the long-form piece that explores what happens if a child who is being sexually trafficked commits a violent crime. Is the child punished or protected? Jessica would write in her story, quote, "Across the country, courts are grappling with whether to punish or protect children who are both perpetrators of serious crimes and victims of sex trafficking. In Alexis's case, the abuse was disregarded, and she would always live with the consequences." In some states, there are safeguards in place. In Ohio, where Alexis is from, they have a safe harbor law that's supposed to make sure sex-trafficked children receive services, including a guardian ad litem to advocate for them before they face court proceedings. The law was meant to help keep sex-trafficked minors out of adult criminal court. But what if those protections fail? What if prosecutors and judges and someone's own defense attorney mishandles the case? Even Alexis's own attorney didn't know the law that could have given his client resources and possibly even her freedom. This is Jillian, and in partnership with Law and Crime, you are listening to Court Junkie, episode 166. To begin, let's get to know Alexis Martin. You'll hear Jessica Contrera throughout this episode today as she discusses her reporting in her Washington Post piece.
Alexis Martin is honestly one of the smartest people I've ever met. The way that she speaks is with the wisdom of somebody so much older than she is, and with so much more self-awareness than honestly most adults in my life. She grew up in Akron and was, from a young age, really just a parent type figure to her younger siblings. She loves her sisters and little brothers so much, and everything in her life is, a result of her trying to love and protect them.
Alexis carried a lot of weight on her shoulders. Court documents depicted her traumatic upbringing. Quote, "Her parents were often absent from her life. Both her parents and her stepfather were involved with drugs, and her mother was imprisoned for drugs. Martin's father physically abused her. She was shuffled between family members and foster parents, and she changed schools often. A family member mocked Alexis for being biracial. Another family member locked her in a dark closet as punishment." Also from court documents, quote, "Alexis was diagnosed with depression by age 8. According to Alexis, when she was 10 and 11 years old, a 21-year-old man repeatedly raped her. At age 12, Alexis attempted suicide, and her 16-year-old boyfriend raped and impregnated her. She suffered a miscarriage and had the unborn child's name tattooed on her torso. Perhaps when you think of someone being sex trafficked, you have a certain image already in your mind.
There has been a huge push in the last decade for people to understand what sex trafficking really looks like, because for a long time, I think, the country really saw it as something where, you imagine somebody being, somebody who was not born here being smuggled over a border and held in chains and things like that. And it's not to say that that doesn't happen, but that's not the vast majority of sex trafficking cases in the United States. It's very important that people understand that what it often looks like is what Alexis's story looked like. A kid who was already vulnerable in many ways because she had experienced sex abuse. She had experienced, her mother and father's struggles with drug addiction. She had been through the in and out of the foster care system, and that traffickers are not scary strangers who jump out of bushes, but are often people who they know, whether that is a family member or someone in a trusted position or someone that very often they meet online and who is providing them with a means of love and support and the things that they don't get from other areas.
In Alexis's case, Angelo was a friend's father.
She was looking for a parent type figure. And that is what Angelo Kearney, in her words, promised to be to her. He's actually the father of one of her friends. After she returned from Cincinnati, she was kind of looking for her friend, and she met Angelo instead. They had been sort of family friends for a time. So he seemed like a person that she could trust, and he did a lot to earn her trust. According to her, he bought her things. He made her dinner. He did all of these things that, a social worker would later explain to her is very common for what we call like grooming. And so this was a person that she really trusted until he started asking things of her that she didn't understand at first were wrong. And so she described months of sexual abuse, of being sold to other men, of, just really the worst kinds of things that you can imagine for anyone at any age, let alone a 15-year-old.
Alexis was 15, and she started spending more and more time at Angelo's house. She called it her dad's house. Angelo had her perform exotic dances. She sold drugs for him. She went by the name Alexis Love. He began sex trafficking her for 2 years, according to court documents. But one day, Alexis decided she had had enough, and she wanted out.
This is a story that I can tell you based on what we know from police reports. What she says about it, what the people who were there that I was able to talk to say about it. But like with all these stories, I wasn't there. So that's what I'm basing this on. So my understanding is that she had reached a point where she wanted out. She was beginning to see Angelo not as someone who loved her, but someone who was forcing her to do something that made her feel terrible, and she wanted out.
In early November 2013, about a week before the shooting, Alexis tried to turn herself in to her probation officer. She had a small case still pending over a fight with her sister, and she wanted them to take her to the juvenile jail, but they didn't.
Her probation officer noted that she had less clothing on than she used to and more makeup, and something was off. But ultimately, Alexis didn't feel comfortable disclosing to them what was happening. And in her mind, that was a little bit because of the way that they asked. And what she remembers is them saying, "You're not prostituting yourself out, are you?"
Alexis didn't disclose to her probation officer that day what was really happening with Angelo, that she was being trafficked. She did, however, end up confiding in a former boyfriend, Deshaun Spear.
And Deshaun Spear, according to Alexis, was at that time hanging out with a man named Travasky Jackson, who had just recently been involved in a robbery in Akron in which two women distracted a man, and then two armed men came in and stole thousands of dollars.
According to Alexis, after she told Deshaun what was going on, the three of them, Alexis, Deshaun, and Deshaun's friend, Travasky Jackson, decided they would rob Angelo, like Travasky had recently done in that other robbery.
And so how this plan unfolded was that they would do the same thing to Angelo Kearney. There was another woman who was recruited to be involved. Her name was Janae John. She was just 21 years old.
And so the plan was set into motion. Alexis and Janae would go over to Angelo's house and distract, while Deshaun and Travasky would rob him. On November 7th, 2013, Alexis and Janae went to Angelo's house. They started having sex with Angelo and his brother, Alicio, when Deshaun and Travasky came in.
Rather than execute a robbery like the supposed plan was, one of the men shot and killed Angelo Kearney and shot his brother, Alicio, in the head.
Angelo Kearney was dead. His brother, Alicio Kearney, had also been shot, but he survived. "36-year-old Angelo Kearney lay naked on the carpet in an upstairs bedroom, shot twice in the head. His 18-year-old brother, Alicio, the lone surviving victim, later identified Alexis and the others cleaning up the scene before they fled, according to court documents. Jessica's story described the scene in one of the rooms. In the living room, there was a chrome stripper pole, and beside it, more bloodstains, she wrote. Alexis, the only minor, was one of 4 people arrested. She was charged with delinquency counts of aggravated murder, attempted murder, felonious assault, aggravated robbery, aggravated burglary, and tampering with evidence.
Even though Alexis was definitely not the shooter, was not in the room when the shooting occurred in Ohio, like in many other states, she can still be held liable for murder for all the other crimes that her co-defendants were involved in.
You're in some serious, serious, serious trouble, an Akron police sergeant later told her.
Trafficking is a particularly heinous and unique crime that is different than other kinds of abuse that people experience. And so the importance of making people aware of the way that that trauma can manifest and the protections that are afforded in the law is so important, because had that occurred in Alexis before Alexis was arrested, her trajectory would have been incredibly different.
Jessica's story depicted the scene in the interrogation room when Alexis was interviewed without an attorney. Her story said, quote, "From the moment the Akron detectives walked into the interrogation room on the evening of November 7th, 2013, they were disturbed by what they saw. Sergeant Scott Leitke and Detective John Ross thought the girl handcuffed to the table looked far older than their own daughters had at 15. Alexis's 5'3" frame was squeezed into tight jeans and a tighter tank top. She was wearing high heels. But when she spoke, she asked a child's question. 'Is my mom coming?' 'No,' Leitke answered. Alexis's crime was against the man who had been sex trafficking her, and Alexis began to detail to the officers what had been happening in Angelo's home. She told them that her, quote, dad was running an escort business and that Angelo was a pimp. But the detectives kept interviewing her about what had happened to Angelo. They didn't seem to want to know anything more about her sex trafficking claims. And even after the interview, the Akron police wouldn't investigate that deeper. Maureen Sheridan Kenny, an attorney with the Human Trafficking Law Clinic, said this in a later court filing on Alexis's behalf. Quote, Alexis Martin told everyone who was supposed to be there to help her after her arrest that she was a victim. Yet the safe harbor process was not invoked to help Alexis.
When a girl comes into court and she says things like, oh, he was my pimp, as Alexis did, then you can see that this is not a 15-year-old making a choice to engage in sex work. This is a child who's being exploited. And so then the question is, what do you do about that? So you're seeing prosecutors, judges, public defenders, and police officers, especially, not only being trained on it, but then changing their practices because of it. So there are a number of diversion courts that have popped up across the country. There are laws that are similar to what Ohio has, where it's a safe harbor law that says, the kids cannot be, that if you discover a child has been sex trafficked, then the most important thing is that they get services, not that, they have these charges against them, things like that. So it's happening incrementally. We have come a long way, but as Alexis's case and so many other cases show, there's still a lot of resistance to change as well.
In her Washington Post article, Jessica describes the moment detectives left Alexis alone after they had offered her snacks. Quote, alone in the interrogation room, she suddenly knew what was about to happen. She raised her hand, waving to the camera, trying to get someone's attention. And then her vomit splattered onto the table. When no one came in to help her, she pulled out tissue after tissue and tried to clean up the mess by herself. Jessica wrote, in the days that followed, the Akron police did nothing to follow up on allegations of sex trafficking and abuse of a 15-year-old, though the detectives now acknowledge that it is what should have happened. The Akron police sergeant handed his report over to the Summit County Prosecutor's Office, and prosecutors would soon argue that Alexis deserved consequences just as severe as her adult co-defendants. Alexis was sent to juvenile jail while she awaited her trial. Alexis's defense attorney was Noah Munier, an attorney 3 years out of law school who juggled 200 cases a year. Noah would later openly admit that he didn't understand Ohio's safe harbor law. I believed it only applied to juveniles charged with prostitution, and it wouldn't help Alexis, he said, according to a court filing. That filing also claimed the judge didn't understand the law either. And so Alexis's defense didn't raise the issue that Alexis had been a sex trafficking victim. Noah didn't call any witnesses to testify during a hearing when Alexis's case was transferred from juvenile to adult court. And he didn't request the safe harbor protections which were intended to keep children's cases out of adult court and would have given Alexis a guardian ad litem to advocate and listen to her. He would later acknowledge his shortcomings. It was and is the worst case of my career, he said in Jessica's story. Now Alexis was facing murder charges as an adult. Maureen Sheridan Kenny said in a court filing, quote, Alexis, who has known nothing but sexual exploitation, severe abuse, neglect, and trafficking since the age of 9, was treated like an adult and her victimization was given no consideration in the criminal process whatsoever. As I said earlier, Ohio has something called a safe harbor law that is supposed to protect young people like Alexis in moments like this. It passed in 2012.
Over a year before Alexis was arrested, Ohio passed and immediately enacted this thing called safe harbor. And what that does is basically say that if a child is arrested and they have been trafficked, their attorney can come to court and say these crimes were, related to the trafficking that they experienced. And then a judge has the opportunity to hold a hearing to see if that is the case. And if so, then that child can have their charges put on hold while they receive services. What the services are sort of depends on a case-by-case basis, depending on where it's happening. But the most important thing is that this child gets a guardian ad litem, which is somebody whose job it is just to advocate for them, different than what their lawyer does, but to tell their story. And in Alexis's case, her attorneys believe that had she had a guardian ad litem, she would have had somebody to explain that this was a result of her trying to escape from this man who was sexually abusing her. But, as this often happens, these laws get passed with no funding behind them to train people or a communication plan to inform people. And so everyone involved in Alexis' case essentially said, well, we didn't really know about this. And so Alexis was afforded none of those protections. She didn't even receive therapy. She just was put in juvenile jail. The prosecutors believe she, to this day, that she is responsible for this crime, that she is the manipulator and the mastermind behind this crime, and that she deserves to be in adult prison.
Following her attorney's advice, Alexis pleaded guilty to aggravated murder and felonious assault. The issues of sex trafficking had surfaced at Alexis's sentencing hearing, although it hadn't swayed the judge to give her a lighter sentence. Quote, "The court discussed Alexis's relationship with Angelo. The facts in the report indicate that Ms. Martin was basically, in a certain sense, working for Angelo Kearney, assisting him as he dealt with young women who were making themselves available in escort work, which is a polite way of saying prostitution." Alexis was sentenced to 21 years to life in prison. Her adult co-defendants also received lengthy sentences. Travasky Jackson was sentenced to 31 years to life. Deshawn Spear got 41 years to life, and Janae Jones received 15 years to life. Alexis's childhood had been filled with abuse and neglect. Now her teenage years, and beyond, would be spent behind bars in an adult prison. At the Washington Post, Jessica Contrera's work often takes a deep dive into the lives of children and teenagers. She began tracking cases across the country involving children who had been sex trafficked and what happens when they commit a crime.
I was interested in writing about trafficking because I ended up writing a lot about kids and teenagers. And so back in 2019, I was looking for ways to write about trafficking and I learned a lot about this idea of the criminalization of sex trafficking survivors. So what happens when survivors get involved in the legal system, especially when they're involved in a very serious crime. And that brought me to the case of Crystal Kaiser.
Jessica wrote about the state of Wisconsin versus Crystal Kaiser in 2018. Crystal was 16 years old when she met Randy Volar, who was 33. He had sexually assaulted her multiple times, something the prosecution, the defense, and the judge all agreed on in her case. After he had been released from jail awaiting trial on charges that included child sexual assault, Crystal went to his house and shot him twice in the head, lit him on fire, and took his car. Crystal says when she told Volar she didn't want to have sex with him that night, he pinned her to the floor. She was charged with arson and first-degree intentional homicide. About a month ago, in early June 2021, an appellate court in Wisconsin ruled that Crystal may be able to use the state's affirmative defense law, which means she will be able to present evidence that she did what she did as a direct result of being trafficked. If she's successful at showing that, she could be acquitted of some or even all of her charges. Prosecutors have said they plan on appealing the ruling. Jessica said she wanted to show people that Crystal's story is not unique, so she decided to feature other cases like hers. And that's when she came across Alexis's case, a case she vaguely remembered from her own hometown.
there are people who are involved in sex work who are being trafficked, and you see them being arrested for solicitation or prostitution. Then there are crimes that we know that sex trafficking victims are forced to commit. So that could be carrying drugs for their trafficker. That could be recruiting somebody else. That could be, robbery, theft, things like that. And we're seeing a change in the country where those people can go back to the courts or on the front end, go to the courts and say, I was doing this because I'm a victim of sex trafficking and this is related to my crime. That is kind of becoming an accepted practice with the idea that, they could get their records cleared, things like that. What is less accepted is what happens when the crime that they're involved in is a very violent one. And what if, that violence was part of their plan to escape or was directed against the person who is abusing them? When I went looking for cases like this, I found cases, where they weren't identified as a trafficking victim at the time. They might have been identified just as a teenager or teen prostitute, a phrase that is problematic in so many ways, and things like that, dating back to the 90s. And then there, in recent years, there are a number of these cases. So, the last couple of years that I've been tracking it, cases where a kid who is being trafficked or says they're being trafficked is involved in a murder has happened probably 2-3 times a year that I know of. So I'm certain that it's even probably higher than that.
At age 17, Alexis Martin was serving her time in an Ohio prison. Prison was a place where she found more stability than she ever had in her life in the outside world.
Going to prison provided her with the most stability that she has ever had in her life, as far as being able to go to school, have support, have just her basic needs met of having a safe place to sleep and food to eat. Now, if you were to ask her if she could have had those needs met another way, it's certainly, I don't get the sense that she's, I guess what I just want to point out is that it says a lot about our society that when there is a kid in need, that prison is a way that they can get those needs met, in comparison to, I think, what we would hope for all kids is that they can have those needs met without being incarcerated. And that is a big question in this world of anti-trafficking work. These are kids who need a ton of resources and stability, and who are, have been for so long the throwaways of our society. This is especially true for young Black girls.
While in prison, Alexis earned her GED, and she wrote poetry.
She also just has this incredible mastery of words and language. So she writes poetry. She's written poetry for a long time. That is just sort of jaw-dropping.
One of Alexis's poems was published in Jessica's story. It read, "If I stay up all night, my mind loses memories. I'm too sleepy to hold a thought. Finally, in the daytime, I can start sleeping. I lose the feelings of weeping, the feelings of their hands seeking. No, don't judge me now. Keep reading. I had to keep breathing." Alexis also focused on getting her certifications to prepare for a career after she served her time. She learned how to work on heating, ventilation, and air conditioning units. She advanced and was even doing maintenance on the prison's own systems.
She also was very accomplished in what she was able to achieve in prison. So she actually has all of her certifications, I think almost to work in HVAC. So she has like a really intricate interest in like air conditioning systems and things like that I know literally nothing about. So she's impressive in more ways than one. She is a multifaceted person, and I hope that comes across in the story, because I think too often when we talk about sex trafficking, we talk to a survivor, they are reduced to the thing that happened to them rather than the person that they are.
While Alexis was in prison, the outside world was changing too. There was more awareness about sex trafficking, what it really looks like, and what it means to be a victim, especially within the criminal justice system. Cyntoia Brown, who you might remember from Court Junkie episode 149, was 16 years old when she shot and killed a man who had been exploiting her. In her 30s, Cyntoia was granted clemency and was released from prison after spending 15 years behind bars. Alexis also had a legal team fighting for her release. Her case made it all the way up to the Ohio Supreme Court.
This question about the safe harbor law and how it should work was raised to the Ohio Supreme Court, and they agreed that Alexis should have had a guardian ad litem. So that matter is still in Alexis's case. Her first attorney, who didn't get her a guardian ad litem, is willing to essentially, say he was what they call an ineffective assistance of counsel, and try to get it so that her first conviction is no longer relevant, and that she might have a chance of having her record cleared. But at this time, the prosecutors in her case are continuing to fight that because, like I mentioned earlier, they believe that, it was Alexis who led the other adults she was with to the house, that she is the one who's responsible for all of this happening.
In 2018, the state Supreme Court decided 6-1 to uphold Alexis's murder conviction. Prosecutors contended that what happened during the robbery was considered separate from her history as a sex trafficking victim. Alexis's side argued that the juvenile judge erred when her past wasn't properly explored at the hearing, where she was bound over to adult court. But Alexis's case wasn't over by any means after the state Supreme Court ruling. Her story caught the attention of Kim Kardashian, who visited her in prison, making Alexis's story even more well-publicized. In 2019, Alexis stood before the parole board. Prosecutors claimed she hadn't disclosed she was a trafficking victim in her first interview with police. They argued that she only brought it up later to try and help steer herself out of trouble. Jessica disputes what the prosecutors said, saying she watched Alexis's taped interview firsthand.
I think just the basic facts of what her case was and wasn't were misconstrued. To this day, when I wanted to talk to the prosecutors and understand, well, what was it that made them feel that Alexis, deserved to spend her adult life in prison. The things that they explained about the case, the pattern of events that they said occurred was just not true. They said that Alexis didn't confess in her first interview with police, and that only in later interviews did she confess. But I had just watched the video. I had just seen her confess, and there were no other interviews that ever happened. She told them, about 5 minutes after being read her rights, that Angelo Kearney, was a pimp, and that should have triggered the safe harbor law. That should have given everyone pause, but instead that was continuously ignored. She again told a social worker in the juvenile jail. She told a court psychologist who was interviewing her. And I think at the time, all kinds of people just didn't know how to handle those disclosures. And so it gave the prosecutors a narrative that she did not disclose any of this trafficking until later on, when she saw she could get a benefit from it, was the words that they used. And so that is the blessing of reporting and being able to go back and look at things years later. We can see that what they shared about the case was not true, and show them that.
Regardless of what the prosecutors had to say, the majority of the parole board sided with Alexis. In 2020, Ohio Governor Mike DeWine held a press conference where he called Alexis a sex trafficking survivor. After Alexis had spent more than 6 years in prison, she was now going to be released at age 21. Governor DeWine spoke during the height of the coronavirus pandemic, as he said Alexis and 6 others were being commuted. In addition to Alexis, he also highlighted the commutation of Tom No, a defendant in one of Ohio's largest public corruption scandals. Here's what he said about Alexis, courtesy of TV station WTOL 11.
The other was Alexis Martin. She was 15 years of age when she committed the crime, 17 when she went to prison. She is a child sex trafficking survivor. She will be sent to an appropriate group home, and she will be under supervision for an extensive period of time.
He said the facts of Alexis's case are particularly unique, and that the ultimate decision under the Ohio Constitution is his, and that he takes responsibility for the decision.
I can say is that I take that responsibility extremely seriously. I think about it a lot. It made, in my opinion, that in these 2 cases, that this was appropriate after the period of time that they had served in prison to issue a commutation. That does not mean they walk away free. It means they're under supervision.
When Alexis was released in April 2020, she did a cartwheel in the grass, and then she cried. Her supporters were there to cheer her on. It was no doubt a dark time in the world. Most businesses and governments were on lockdown, and people were in heightened fear during the early months of the coronavirus pandemic. That's when Alexis was going to start her new life outside.
I mean, can you imagine getting out of prison after 7 years and you can't hug your best friend? That's the reality that she was in at the time. It was so early in the pandemic. There was, they and her attorneys wanted her to make sure that she followed every single rule.
Just like the governor stressed, Alexis would be closely watched by the state. She is on parole until at least 2034, and any legal slip-up could send her right back to prison. The ankle monitor she wears is a constant reminder of that. Jessica remembered one moment when Alexis was shopping, looking for new clothes. She wandered into the men's section, looking for baggy pants to hide the ankle bracelet.
She very much is still being monitored by the state. Not only does she have, probation conditions like that she's not allowed to leave the state and that she has to do drug testing and check-ins and all of that, she is being monitored by a GPS ankle bracelet, which if anybody's ever seen one of those, what that does to make you stick out in places. That is a condition of her parole that her attorneys just really do not understand because, they don't see her as somebody who is violent. They don't see her as somebody who's in need of immense supervision. They just see her as somebody who needs support, who needs therapy, who needs to work, all those things that she's doing. So I'll be interested to see, the parole board, the governor, they do have the chance to change her parole conditions if they choose. But at this time, she is on parole until 2034, 14 years. So that's, that can impact how you see your life, I think.
In the meantime, Alexis is rebuilding her life. According to Jessica, she has reconnected with her siblings. And she has built friendships with other sex trafficking survivors who almost feel more like family now. She lives with one of them who has become a mentor in the Cincinnati suburbs. You can see the photographs of Alexis's bedroom in the Washington Post story, complete with stuffed animals and Christmas lights on the wall.
She came out with a support system better than many other people have coming out of prison, and that she had lawyers who supported her and a family that wanted to take her in. But that said, she wants to go to college, and that's very expensive. And so she has been working as a restaurant hostess and a gas station clerk. She works like 6 days a week. It's hard to get a hold of her because she works so much, and I admire that a lot. And along with that, she's had the opportunity to, become the advocate that she didn't have. So she already has spoken at a human trafficking conference in Ohio, educating people about what she went through. She is, finding ways to help individual victims. People reach out to her on Facebook and say, I want out. And she calls the human trafficking hotline on their behalf.
In a way, Alexis's past is helping shape her future.
Since she was, really young, when she was in the first juvenile detention facility at 15, she has talked about opening up a community center in Akron or in somewhere else like that could be a safe place for kids to go. And what I really love about that is, yes, she wants to help trafficking victims for sure, but I think she sees the problem in a more holistic way and understands that there's things that you can do for kids to help them so that they never are victimized, so that they never end up going through the abuse that she did. So she is actively working on that, and that's why she wants to go to college, is to get a degree in nonprofit management so that she can run that community center someday. And I have a lot of confidence in her that that's probably going to happen.
To learn more about how sex trafficking victims are treated in the criminal justice system, and to read more about Alexis's story, as well as Crystal Kaiser's, who I mentioned earlier, check out Jessica Contrera's articles in the Washington Post. I'll link both of those in the show notes, but there are more.
I would just encourage people, if they are interested in this issue, to understand that this is more than just Alexis, right? So if you check out the story, you'll see there's a number of different cases that we feature. Crystal Kaiser in Wisconsin, Ajane Sma in Pennsylvania, Debbie Trevino and Jordan Hampton in Texas. These are cases that are still, they're not as progressed as Alexis's is. They're still facing charges. They're still fighting to be able to present evidence of their trafficking in the court system. So this is an issue that, very much is evolving and changing in moment by moment in laws and in practices and policies. But when it comes down to it, there are real kids whose lives are forever going to be changed by what is decided.
And that's all for this episode. A special thank you to Jessica Contrera, whose story I came across in the Washington Post, and I just knew we had to talk to her. Like I said, I'll link her articles in the show notes. This episode was researched and written by Gabrielle Russon. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts about this case. Let me know by joining the conversation on Instagram at CourtJunkie, by tweeting me at CourtJunkiePod, or by emailing me at podcast@courtjunkie.com. If you'd like to hear these episodes without the ads and hear additional Court Junkie bonus episodes, check out my Patreon options at courtjunkie.com/support. And be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel at youtube.com/courtjunkie. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.